Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the From the Hart podcast presented by the First Bank Center for Family-Owned Businesses. This is, I believe, episode number 109 of the From the Hart podcast. I'm excited today to have a fairly new friend of mine. I think we've known of each other longer than we've known each other, but John Forsyte, he is the president and CEO of the Pacific Symphony here in Orange County, California. For those who are watching on YouTube, you can see John's smiling face here looking back at us. For those of you listening, I'll share a little bit about John. Very impressive and extensive bio. I'm going to pull from memory first before I dive into what's in my notes. You've been and we'll start on this right away. You've been the CEO of the Pacific Symphony for, is it 26 years? Is that right?
Correct.
That seems like a long tenure for any CEO anywhere. How is that comparing to other symphonies or nonprofits that you know of? 26 years.
It's a long time, and there's some idiosyncratic reasons for that. But I think I have one colleague who's running a major orchestra in the United States who started pretty much the same month I did, or somewhere around that. So the two of us have sort of mirrored our careers together.
Yeah. When did you know in your life that this was the path for you?
It's funny that the other night we played a symphony by a Czech composer named Antonín Dvořák, his eighth symphony, and it's a really beautiful work. And I was a freshman in college at the University of Illinois, and it's a wonderful thing that university had an extraordinary performing arts center. And the Chicago Symphony would make an annual pilgrimage down to central Illinois. And they played this symphony. And I went to the concert. And I had such an emotional reaction to the beauty of the work that I called my mother and I said, "I'm really sorry to disappoint you. I'm not going to be a doctor.
Not going to medical school. Yep.
I have to do something in music. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm not a talented musician, but I have to find a way to be part of the classical music world." So I had that lightning bolt experience. And
Did you play an instrument at that point?
yeah, I played the violin
Okay.
since the age of 7, and I played for many, many, many years until my first daughter was born. I'll get back to it, but
Sure.
it's an avocational interest. I've always played in orchestras.
Yeah.
But I think, sometimes when you're not the greatest artist, it's sort of like athletics. You come to really appreciate the great musicians,
Sure.
the great athletes. And there's part of music that is, I've called it small muscle Olympians. They have that incredible facility. And it just, the Chicago Symphony was and continues to be one of the world's great orchestras. So to hear it in a great concert hall was, stimulus for me to make the decision.
Something, and you and I, we've talked about this before over meals and so forth. I'm not a musician. I come from somewhat of a musical family, not classical music, but my brothers both sing, play the guitar, piano. Dad played the piano and the banjo. Sisters played flute and piano and sing and everything. So I have an appreciation more than a talent for it. But like you, just last night I turned on the TV. Dua Lipa, pop singer, is on this CBS special with this amazing 58-piece, I think, orchestra at Royal Albert Hall. And I'm like, yes, she's beautiful and a great singer and everything, but I'm looking past her the whole time watching the symphony, trying to get as many symphony shots as I can. And your point is right on. There was an emotional reaction for me, and I'm 60 years old. It's not like I'm a college student who plays the violin. I can only imagine if I would have heard that at your age, I probably would have had the same response, because I respond, when you were kind enough to take us to go to the Aretha Franklin celebration at the at Segerstrom recently, I had that reaction again. There's something about it. What is it? And I'm straying from script, but as the host of the podcast, I get to do that. But we'll come back. Why do you think that is? Obviously you've seen a lot of people probably come in and experience the symphony for the first time, and then they're just completely hooked. What is it about that music, or from your expertise, that draws us in, that gives us that emotional response, in your opinion?
I think it's neurologically different for different people.
Yeah.
For me, I was really drawn to beautiful melody. I mean, I think, I was a Beatle maniac,
Yeah.
British rock. I think a lot of the 1960s music had such beautiful melodic invention. So my ear sort of had that um, reaction. And I think a lot of British musicians also were exposed to the orchestral and band traditions in their country. It's a great orchestral and band nation. So I think that's part of it for me was the melodic beauty. And composers like Tchaikovsky, obviously the Nutcracker is very beloved, not just for the ballet, but for the music.
Right.
So that melodic invention is one. I think the power of basically three choirs. You have a string choir, a wind choir, and a brass choir. And when they combine forces and a great composer's writing harmonically interesting music, I think it surprises people how powerful it's, I hear a lot of people say classical music's relaxing, and I don't find that to be the case. I find it to be
Energizing.
very stimulating.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's true for everybody, certainly not right away. I think it's a language that you acquire over time. And the more complicated the orchestral music, the more time it takes. So, you know, it's an incredible journey. That I've been doing this for 40 years,
Yeah.
listening to music in a very deep and consistent way. And it's endlessly interesting to me. The last thing I'd say is people don't realize how much interpretive range there is with orchestral music. It kind of explains why there are sometimes hundreds of recordings of the same piece.
Yeah.
There's so much variety in a 40-minute work that an interpretive artist, the conductor, can make a huge difference. And that's fascinating. And also the sound of orchestras are different. And that's fascinating. So there's just a lot of things to journey into. But I do think the athletics of symphonic music, the precision, the power, it's hard to believe it's all human powered. It's not
Right.
electronic.
Yeah.
That moves people.
That's what struck me when we were with you a couple weekends ago, and I'm just little by little I'm watching. I kept kind of gravitating back to the first violin and reading up on his story a little bit and everything else. But a lot of the people who watch and listen to this show are in leadership roles. So I want to go to the conductor for a moment. I had a drummer on the other day who, the drummer kind of, and he's in more of a rock and Christian band. But and I think we had texted a little bit or emailed about how he knows one of the percussionists in your symphony. Talk about the role of a great conductor and how, tie that to leadership. I know that, you've got 58 or 75 or how many people are in the actual Pacific Symphony at any given time at a concert?
Typically it's over 80 and it
Okay.
can be over 100, depending on what the composer asks.
So you've got 80 to 100 people on any given performance and one conductor. So that leadership skill set, go to Carl Sinclair, your recently retired conductor. And then you have your new conductor. What do you see in them as far as leadership capabilities and qualities that are kind of in a similitude to what you do as a CEO?
Well, it's a very complicated art form, conducting. I think, first of all, you have to remember that the people who are sitting in the chairs of a symphony orchestra are probably among, if not the most well-trained professionals. They're starting their professional training often in elementary school.
Yeah.
I can't think of another profession
Yeah.
where, you're working hours a day, and then you're going into the most prestigious conservatories around the world to perfect and hone this artistry. And then you have to compete for a job against 100 similar people behind a screen. No one knows you're back there. And it's just this kind of intense gauntlet that they go through to get their jobs. And they're not done, because then they have to earn tenure, and
Then they got to
so
keep the job, right? It's like a
that's right.
professional athlete. Once you get there, there's a million people behind you that want your job.
Yeah, and it's just an extraordinary thing that the person who plays an oboe is playing this double reed instrument. They have to know how to carve bamboo
Hmm.
and blow a tiny stream of air through two reeds that are wound together with fish wire and make this gorgeous sound. And it sounds terrible when most people play it. So the conductor is standing in front of people who know their craft
Yeah.
far better than they do. They have to know enough about the craft of all of these musicians to be able to lead them and communicate with them in a way that provides inspiration, some guidance, some cohesion. And a lot of that is done without speaking,
Hmm.
which is really an amazing thing about the greatest conductors speak with their eyes. They communicate kind of an empathy through gesture. They convince people to do things through all of these emotive, nonverbal ways. And I think that's a beautiful thing. If you watch the faces of the conductors, they're remarkably
Hmm.
descriptive. So that's one piece of it. One is that they just have to be a master musician and they have to have thoroughly studied the score that they're conducting. And it's a very monastic life. They're alone a lot
Hmm.
studying. And if you look at a conductor score, it's vertical. In other words, they have all the lines of the music. They have every single instrument on their score. And then it's horizontal and then it's going through time. So they have a harmonic relationship. They have a sonic relationship between all the instruments. So to do their job well, they have to be thinking in like three time zones. The past, they have to think, oh, there's a problem. So the past has now gone by. You have to be in the present. And then you have to think, how do I fix the problem? So you have to forecast and physically adjust to help fit. Let's say the
Yeah.
trombones enter a little early, it throws other people off. How do you gesture without speaking? So
Wow.
there's tremendous amount of coordination and preparation, communication. I think a lot of what the conductors are doing is they're managing the space and energy between them and the artists. There's this magical space, and they're also managing silence because a lot of scores have these remarkable silent moments
Yeah.
that,
That's where
that
the power is.
where you can have this enormous climax and then just this like silence, and it's that space and managing that space can really suck the emotion out of
Yeah.
you. So I think the great leader of an orchestra is an intellectual that knows history and context of the composition, has some idea about what the composer's intentions were, brings their own life experiences to the story of the work, has tremendous communication ability in rehearsals. So in rehearsals, there's a lot of communication.
Sure.
And there's a lot of diagnostic work that's done to try and create that homogeneous team spirit. Um, and again, with the people that are so skilled in their seats, I think the biggest word that I hear conductors talk about is I have to trust the orchestra.
Sure.
And there are things that they pick out. There's diagnostic work that they know they have to do. And then there are things that they really have to allow their team to figure out on their own. And I really feel like that is a very hard thing sometimes for people who have control tendencies.
Yeah.
I know that for myself,
Sure.
that
We see that in
I,
coaching too. Some coaches will leave the players on the court or on the field and let them figure it out. Others will jump in and keep calling timeout and calling them over. And
right.
yeah, the great ones will let them figure it out.
Yeah, it's setting an atmosphere. Like I think if the atmosphere is joyous for something like the Dvorak Eighth Symphony, the spirit of the orchestra is lifted and they convey the joy of the work. There may be a different kind of emotion that the conductor has to set in the room to do something that has deep religious implications, like a symphony by Anton Bruckner, who was a very deeply religious Catholic. And at the end of his life, he was writing works that spoke to the journey he was going on. And so how do you set that mood where people have to concentrate for like 60, 70 minutes to
Mhm.
tell that story.
Yeah.
How do you conduct, that's very different than a Johann Strauss polka, right? Or frankly, new music, which can have contemporary themes. So I think the conductors are these very wise, the really good ones. They have world wisdom. They're educators. They
Yeah.
have fantastic ears. They listen really carefully, and they get out of the way when they need to and allow their talented artists to make their art. It's very interesting.
What's more common, and I think of an out of the music industry and leadership again, that great people can make a good leader great, and great leader can make good people great. When you think about it, I mean, the orchestra, they're already great to your point. I mean, they didn't just like land here and say, "Hey, I'm going to go sit in this chair and play." Obviously, it's from childhood, as you pointed out. But have you seen examples of where the orchestra just has it and maybe the conductor doesn't that night, or vice versa, and how they rescue each other?
That's a great question. Yes, and sometimes the conductor is not well prepared.
Hmm.
Um, I think more common, however, is that the conductor does not know how to fix difficult problems and keeps trying to, but doesn't succeed, and it frustrates an orchestra. So, and maybe never got fixed in rehearsals. And then, observe the musicians will go off and work on it themselves. They'll just do their own sectional off the clock, so to speak.
Nice.
But I think there's maybe even a more profound problem, which is the leader's not inspiring.
Hmm.
And I'll tell you, the Pacific Symphony is an orchestra that doesn't really allow low energy on stage.
Yeah.
They're a really intense group of musicians. And that's during this music director search where we had all these guest conductors coming. A lot of them didn't know the Pacific Symphony. We're not attached to a famous city. We're a
Right.
big orchestra. We're a major orchestra. We have recordings, but if they're from Europe, they maybe were less familiar. And they also the same thing. Your musicians are incredibly responsive. They're fast, and they really are dedicated. And there was no like plateau for the orchestra. So I think some of it is just this professional spree. And I will tell you, there are very famous orchestras that play disappointingly when they're not inspired.
Hmm. I would
And I
imagine.
think some of it is fatigue. I think some
Sure.
orchestras play a lot of concerts and they're tired.
Yeah. What made Carl Sinclair so great? He did this for a long time, and I'm not I'm becoming a symphony guy thanks to you in large part. It's all I listen to now. I mean, in the car,
Oh,
in my office, I love it. Um, John sent me a list of just, it's like, what do you call, I call it my classical music
my
Bible.
basic record library.
Yeah, basic record library. Yeah, it's phenomenal. I've been going through a little at a time and writing down notes and
Oh, that's
and
so
I'm
nice.
trying to tune in, like when I listen to KUSC or I listen on Pandora or anywhere. I'm trying to, and I'm so far away, but I'm so proud when I hear a piece and I know who it is. And that's largely because of you and the preparation and the training, just in the little bit that I've known you that you've given me. But what was it that made Carl such a great conductor?
Well, first of all, let me clarify that he's not retiring, and we're very fortunate that he is, he's being named music director laureate, so he'll continue to come back.
Awesome.
And he also has a very rich career as an educator. So he's the head of the Thornton School Orchestras at USC.
Right.
So that continues. He'll guest conduct. It's interesting. Conductors don't really retire unless there's serious health issues.
Yeah.
It's something you can do very late in life. I went to a concert last night or yesterday afternoon with a conductor that could barely walk out onto the podium, a brilliant, famous, beautiful musician, Zubin Mehta, very famous music director of the LA Philharmonic decades ago. And he conducted probably one of the most complicated scores I've ever seen. But you know, can't move very easily. So I think Carl Sinclair has a lot of wonderful qualities as a leader. He does engender some of the things we talked about already, which is he has, first of all, beautiful gestures and beautiful ways of conveying what he's trying to achieve. his preparation, I think if you ask the musicians, they say no one works harder at being prepared for a concert. He is just, and often he memorizes these massive scores, 70, 80-minute pieces he has completely memorized. So he has that kind of mind, this phenomenal memory, but it doesn't come easily. He works really hard. He'll tell
Yeah.
you to spend hours and hours to learn one measure, and he does that very meticulously. He's a fantastic communicator, and he communicates in a way that I think has made something that can be perceived as intimidating very, very accessible to the community. He cares deeply about how the orchestra serves its community. And that is something that we do have a fantastic reputation nationally, that
Yeah.
this orchestra is an orchestra of the community. And that's really a reflection of Carl's values. So we can talk more about that, but.
Can you talk a little bit about that now? Just share with me how I want to dive into a couple other things here for sure. But how does the orchestra, beyond the music, what are some of the examples of how the symphony, you and the symphony and Carl and others get involved in the community? And I want to go kind of a part two after that. You mentioned in the bio, and I really want to dive into how did you serve the community and continue your mission as a symphony during the pandemic when nobody could come to the hall and hear the music, but you still had this massive impact with some of the initiatives that you implemented. So community service first, and then how did you do all of that and fulfill your mission when people couldn't come to you?
Well, I'm sure that your business leaders who would watch this know of the Venn diagram.
Yes.
And I think there are two terms we have in the orchestral world. One is music education, and the other is community engagement. And they really overlap, but sometimes I think they're a little bit different. They use similar tools, but music education is a very powerful goal, and it includes things like enrichment versus instrumental training. So, for example, in the elementary schools in Orange County, we have a program called Class Act, and it's fundamentally about enrichment. We're exposing children often whose families and they personally would never have a chance to hear a symphony orchestra. We're exposing them to the complexity, like we talked about, the history, and how it connects to their lives, how it connects to math, history, art, so forth. So it is interdisciplinary, and so a musician visits the schools regularly. They're joined by their colleagues for a family night, then they're bused to hear the orchestra at the concert hall. But it's all wrapped around the life of a particular composer in every given year. And that life is usually quite interesting because, take Beethoven. He was writing a lot of his music during the Napoleonic Wars, and he was a fierce proponent of democracy at a time that, all of this monarchy was coming down, and the revolutions of America, France, and so forth. But he was also a disappointed Democrat in that Napoleon declared himself emperor. And so you hear that in his music, and you can talk about it with kids at varying levels as you go through time. So that music education program is really sophisticated, and it's been really well received over many years. We're celebrating the 30th anniversary of Classic. So that's music education in the form of enrichment. But then we have these training programs where we're doing everything from going to a school that doesn't have a music program and teaching after school. We're coaching high school orchestras. And then at the very sort of top of that spectrum are the middle and high school kids who are really advanced and win positions in the Pacific Symphony youth ensembles, which are some of the most outstanding in the country. These students are winning. We sent our youth orchestra to Vienna and they won a competition. We sent our youth wind ensemble to Vienna. They won a competition. So these are super advanced high school. I couldn't touch them at their and many of them don't go into music. They're going to STEM fields. I always say to employers, the smartest thing you could do is come and visit our youth orchestra, youth wind ensemble rehearsals and start talking to these students about staying in Orange County and working for their companies when they finish their college education, because they are some of the best and brightest. And music has a lot to do with the quality of their education. So that's kind of one area. Then we have adult enrichment, of course. We have many ways that we provide enrichment to adults, from pre-concert lectures to online materials and so forth. With community engagement, I think of Class Act and these others as a way to engage because we have to listen to our partners
Hmm.
and we have to respond to them. That's engagement as opposed to outreach.
Yeah.
It's a two-way relationship. There's not a more powerful partner, right? It's working together. But we have a lot of programs that are meant to really serve, and we offer a lot of music and wellness initiatives and centers, cognitive degeneration, which has proven to be helped by music.
Yeah.
We're doing a study with UC Irvine now on how music can affect depression, pain, anxiety. So music and wellness is a big initiative. Then we have accessibility, and we're providing many free programs, and this relates back to the pandemic.
Yeah.
Symphony on the Go, which is a mobile stage series we offer throughout the county, was inaugurated during the pandemic to
Okay.
perform outside in your neighborhood. So we set up a mobile stage in Floral Park on a street, close the street off, and the neighbors come out. Or
Wow.
we're in your local park. So that was one example, but we also did thousands of hours of video production for Class Act as an example. We kept
Yeah.
teaching, and the musicians were incredible during that time. I mean, they were, that we were basically a little Netflix, just performing all this
Nice.
on-demand video. And for that, we got a really wonderful recognition from State Senator Dave Mind, who gave us the Nonprofit of the Year recognition for that work.
Yeah, that's
So.
a proud moment. I know I do a lot of work with nonprofits, and to see the work, and maybe it's my ignorance, or I haven't been around enough to know this, but do most people understand that a symphony is a nonprofit? I mean, is that something that you come across? Do people find surprise in that, or is that something that's pretty well known?
I think most people are surprised who are not embedded in our world
Mhm.
or are very casual consumers. Because, naturally you'll see a full house and you're paying for your tickets. But what you don't realize is that, just as an example, the classical concerts require 4 rehearsals and you're renting a hall. We rent the Renee and Henry Segerstrom Concert Hall from the
Yeah.
Segerstrom Center, which is a separate nonprofit from the Pacific Symphony.
Yep.
So to subsidize the orchestra's salaries, these are all professional musicians. They all
Mhm.
get paid for everything they do.
Yeah.
And, it's just a very expensive art form. But all of these projects that we're doing in the community, I described Class Act, Music and Wellness. We have a middle school immersion camp, the youth ensembles. They're all heavily subsidized. So our budget is about typically $24 million. We're generating about 6.5 million in ticket revenue.
Okay.
So what makes up the difference,
There's
right?
together 17 and a half, 18 million, right?
Yeah, well, it's
Yeah.
hard. We
Yeah.
have an endowment of about 40 million now, which then we can extract about 5%.
Hmm.
So that's 2 million.
Yeah.
We have contracted work. So the Segerstrom Center hires us to do the Nutcracker Ballet. So part of that income is contracts with various entities that pay us to perform. We have some educational fees, like for example, Class Act, we charge 12% of the costs. It's very modest, but
Yeah.
we want the teachers in the schools to have some skin in the game.
Sure.
When you add it all up, our earned revenue is maybe 11 million,
Yeah.
including that endowment. So the rest is fundraising, and the
Yeah.
fundraising in Orange County, unlike some of the big cities in America, we don't have a lot of corporate support relatively. And I wish businesses here thought more about having a philanthropic strategy and included the arts and culture in that philanthropic
Right.
strategy. But a lot of them are mid-market, small cap companies that are owned by an entrepreneur, and they haven't
Yeah.
developed those strategies yet. And I think that's unusual. So we were reliant for about 90% of that philanthropy from an individual donor. And
Yeah.
that's challenging here.
Sure. Yeah. I did a workshop 10, 12 years ago when I ran the Center for Family Business at Cal State Fullerton, because I sensed from talking with family businesses, which is really the area, the pool I swim in, if you will, that many don't have a philanthropic strategy. In fact, we even asked a question in a survey, and most came back and said they didn't. So we did an event where we called it, "Does your community know you're there?" And basically, if you were to pick up and leave and move, because the economy has made many move, would your community even feel the pain of you leaving? And there's a handful of companies and individuals out there, many of whom you and I both know, who, yeah, if they left, it would be devastating, because they're such not only funders, but also they're pioneers and they're drivers of the cause. So yeah, that's got to be difficult. Is that a big part of what your board members do as well? I know we've talked about the board a little bit, and there's a process for becoming a board member, but there's also an expectation of your board members. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, we try to think of philanthropy as not being a transactional
Right. Absolutely.
process, and that's difficult. I think people are used to joining a club or a dining club and being on a board can feel that way as a membership of society, but really it's a passion. And what I've noticed about our board is that there's a lot of passion.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, yes, they meet the minimum requirements, but they often go well beyond it because they're passionate about what we're doing and they see the impact and they feel the pleasure of this great orchestra. They get to know the musicians, which is an incredible pleasure of being a board member.
Sure.
But philanthropy, there is a kind of resource development part of the board, and it is connecting us to new potential supporters. Many of the board members did not come from the audience, interestingly.
Yeah.
If you were to join the board, you would be an example of someone who wasn't necessarily coming all the time, but got to know the mission and happens to be a soulful person.
Right.
And, wants to make a difference. And you've demonstrated that amazingly as I get to know you. It's wonderful.
I go, no pun intended with my last name, but I tend to serve where my heart is,
That's
some pun intended. Yeah.
Well, that is the joy of life. I see the volunteers, the more engaged they are, the happier they seem to be in their lives.
Yeah.
Because they really feel that they can make a difference. And it's hard work being on the board sometimes. If you're a board chair or, running a committee, there's real commitment involved. Absolutely. But there are also board members that are more they're like strategic partners.
Yeah.
They set the guardrails really well. So they may say, John, we think the Pacific Symphony from a concert standpoint is like an encyclopedic museum. If you think of the great museums of the world, they have a Baroque wing, a classical wing. You are not just a modern art museum. Right. So we want you to explore the range of orchestral music and balance that in a way that's satisfying and educational to the community. And so that's a great strategic guardrail that the board sets. They're essentially the shareholders representing the community, in my opinion. They don't own the orchestra. Effectively, I feel like the orchestra is owned by the community, for the community, by the community. So the board really represents those views, and therefore you need to have a diverse board because we have a diverse community, and that's something we're always thinking about. Not just diversity of ethnicity, but diversity of history in the county, geography, gender, all of that. It's really important. So.
Was the board involved at all in the director choice and that succession? Being the family business guy, succession planning is always a big part of what I focus on and help my clients with. The transition from Carl to Alexandra Shelley as your next music director. Can you talk about that process and maybe how the board got involved and then just that process in general? I mean, you talked about how you had guest conductors come in, and I'm sure the symphony is sort of interviewing them as well. Are they responding to these guests? It was probably an amazing process.
Well, unlike any other executive search, there's not really a firm that can conduct an executive search for a music director. It's an international process for the major orchestras that are doing it. And it's also a very discreet, confidential process because there are conductors who are holding positions.
Sure. Can't let word get out that they're seeking something else.
So we all had to sign disclosure agreements. We said to the musicians, don't call your colleagues in other orchestras, really, until we're at the very, very end of a process and it's become clear. So we formed a search committee that was comprised of 6 board and or community volunteers, 6 musicians, and then 2 members of the staff, myself included.
Yeah.
My colleague Eileen Jeanette is the Senior Vice President of Artistic and Production Planning, and her job is to help us compile a list of conductors based on, suggestions I make or musicians make, and then talk to the managements that represent them. And the management companies are typically in New York, London, and a few other European capitals. But New York is a classical music center, and London is.
Yeah.
And so we have these very famous rosters of conductors, some with very new superstar talent, some with very famous conductors. We knew that the Pacific Symphony probably would not respond well to a 20-something meteor because they're premature and they've had a conductor for a long time, that's been leading them. So they were looking for someone who brought maturity but also youthful energy. And I think that was part of it was a tricky balancing act. We're also looking for someone whose repertoire was diverse enough to keep the audience and the orchestra engaged.
It's also not a first job for someone, kind of like, manager of the Dodgers or Yankees. Typically, you're not going to go get the guy who's never they do at times, but yeah, you're not.
They're great exceptions to that. I mean,
Sure.
Obviously, Leonard Bernstein became music director of the New York Philharmonic with no previous music director experience.
That worked out.
Yeah, and I think sometimes the really, really large institutions can put a kind of a layer of protection and cocoon around these young. But I think when you're an orchestra like ours, we're sort of a smaller, large organization. We really need someone who, and especially in Orange County, where we don't have the civic history of cultural support, you need a Pied Piper. So with Alexander Shelley, who is one of about 10, 12 conductors we were looking at, we saw an incredible communicator, storyteller through his programming, someone who's interested in multidisciplinary art, believes very strongly in music education. And in fact, we flew to Ottawa, Canada, where he's music director of the National Arts Center Orchestra. And he was mentoring all these early career professionals. And they were playing side by side with the professionals of the National Arts Center Orchestra. And it was a flawless performance. I'm thinking to myself, how does he prepare this really hard program? And, it was clear that he's a really efficient rehearser. So there are all these criteria, like we had a rubric, which we would return to without being too formalized about it, because there's a lot of intuition about where the electricity is.
To have a guideline that you can at least fall back on.
Yeah. And it was a fascinating process. And there were many, many great conductors who came here. The good news is that every one of them wanted the job after they spent a week with the Pacific Symphony.
I'll bet. It's like, suddenly the list of people who wanted it got longer than
it was great. Yeah.
It's a good problem to have.
It was great. So
really good problem to have.
And, and Carl was very supportive, although he did not play any role in the selection. There's no, knighting your successor.
Is that common?
It's very critical the musicians fundamentally have the most influence.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if I had been completely opposed, or if the board members were completely opposed, that's a veto. But fundamentally, the musicians are driving the ranking because they have an understanding of what they need to be the most successful.
Yeah.
And we have the best maybe sense of what the community needs in the way of a communicator and a presence. If it's close, there are some great conductors that both had a lot of similar talents.
Yeah.
But Alexander really stood out.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to hear the orchestra symphony with him. I'm looking forward to that.
Early May. Yeah, he's coming back in early May.
Well, I'll be there for sure. I can't wait. I hear that there's construction at the Great Park in Irvine about an amphitheater. Are you guys involved in that? And where do you currently perform? And will you be moving over there if you're involved in that?
Right. We've been a refugee orchestra. We played at
Play where you can.
Well, it was Irvine Meadows for.
Oh yeah, I went there years ago.
As you may remember, it was 30 years that we played there. We started in the late 80s. So that was our summer home. It was our Hollywood Bowl. So
Hmm.
it got torn down to build housing.
Right.
Then we moved to the Pacific Amphitheater at the fairgrounds.
Fairgrounds, right.
And for a variety of reasons, mostly because of calendar and the needs of the fair, we had to move. So we moved to Five Point Amphitheater, which was run by Live Nation and was on the periphery of the great park,
Mm.
and was, again, for Live Nation, their lease ended and Five Point Communities said we need to build housing. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
So that venue went away. And so through the generosity of the city of Irvine and the city council, they allocated resources to build a temporary venue called Great Park Live. And
Mm.
it's a beautiful space, converted lawn. So people sit at tables, and it was very successful. It was inaugurated last summer. And it's a bridging venue. So
Yeah.
we're hoping that a permanent venue will open in 2028, about 10,000 seat capacity with lawn,
So outdoor
and
venue. Okay.
outdoor venue
Yeah.
in the Great Park on, sort of on the southeast end of the
Hmm.
of the venue.
Yeah.
And it should be incredibly beautiful. The architectural renderings I've seen look incredible. So
Wow.
we're very, very excited about it.
And right now you're performing where? I
Right
know.
now we're at the Great Park Live, the
Okay.
temporary. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. What you talked about, I'm fascinated to go back a little bit to the things that you're doing with youth and in the school programming. You talked about how organizations in the STEM industries would be wise to get to know some of these young musicians, apart from the discipline aspect, obviously, that they have to become great world-class musicians like they are, and they're becoming. What are some of the other characteristics, number one, that you see in these kids that makes them so marketable, if you will? I hate to use that term marketable, but attractive to these organizations. But even more so, talk about the impact that you feel that you personally and the symphony are having with our youth throughout Orange County and beyond.
Well, there's a spectrum of reactions. I think for students who feel um, isolated and have a difficult time communicating their emotions, music is a gateway for
Yeah.
them to speak through their art and feel a sense of partnership with people in their ensembles and connect. And they have a common journey. I always found that the struggle of playing an instrument is a profound bonding experience for kids, and it was for me. Sometimes we laugh at just how hard it was.
Yeah.
And it's an incredible team sport. So like any, like athletics, I think there's some of that benefit. But I think the other side, there is a communication side. Like how I express myself
Yeah.
doesn't come easily for every child,
Yeah.
and especially kids who've suffered in some way. So I've seen that the arts are profoundly healing, and they bring tremendous self-esteem benefits for these kids. So there's a confidence level that they can pretty much master something exceptionally difficult. And related to that is tenacity. Again, you're constantly looking, how do you solve this musical problem? And you have to do so mathematically. So their math skills are tremendous because music is naturally a mathematical art form.
Yeah.
Analytically, like what is the composer trying to express? How do I express that? How do I adjust my physical capability? So the brain is just lighting up, and they've
Sure.
done neurological studies on the brain. There's nothing like music. It's incredible. And I say to people who are older and haven't learned an instrument, best thing you can do for your brain is learn an instrument. It's an incredibly powerful
Yeah.
cognitive experience.
So I can still
So
become a saxophonist then at age 60? Because that's like sax and piano and guitar. Those are the three. It's like,
absolutely, any new language is
yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
But when you're adding all of the physical requirements in an instrument, it's fantastic. So I think that's part of it. I think we use the term in our field, we've sort of abandoned STEM. We think STEAM is the more appropriate
Right. Throwing
term.
arts in there. Yeah.
And I would just say study Finland. Study what is happening educationally in Finland to understand how important arts and music are in that society that has accelerated them to to the top learning country in the world. They have beaten everybody. And they don't assign homework. They start elementary school in second grade, and they are steeped in music. Norway gave up their music programs and they immediately started seeing their test scores drop.
Wow.
Finland is breathtaking. You know, we had a Norwegian conductor here last week, and he said, you can walk the streets of Finland and ask them to whistle the opening melody of a Sibelius symphony of a great Finnish composer. They all can do it.
Everybody can do it. Wow.
They're very literate. They spend a lot of money selecting the very, very top teachers to teach elementary school. They value education like no other country. And you know, the success of Finland economically, social contract, you know, through the arts. So I think there's a lot to be said, and we're all learning that we're expressive creatures. We need to have a form of expression. And I think the kids who are in that youth ensemble, those youth ensembles are remarkably focused, tenacious, accomplished, confident. They've overcome a lot of, you know, fear to get in front of people and perform. And a lot of them are really generous. I mean, they take their music to the community. I read notes and letters from students who became within Doctors Without Borders. Mm-hmm. They're still playing the cello. They're going to these little villages in South America to treat patients and play the cello for them. I mean, who wouldn't want somebody like that in your company?
Absolutely.
They're amazing.
Finish this sentence. What I love most about symphony is not Pacific Symphony, but the industry, the art.
The emotional journey of a concert, just being swept away, losing myself in the beauty of the creation.
What do you listen to when it's not symphony music? You talked about the Beatles.
I have pretty eclectic tastes. I would say though that British rock, it's just, you know, from that 60s and 70s, but I love R&B. And I think that, you know, the bedrock of rock and roll and jazz, everything, you know, the African-American contribution to the arts in this country is just incredible. But I have two teenagers, and introduced me to
there's music in your home that's not voluntary to live. Yeah.
I mean, I appreciate Olivia Rodrigo, and I think she's somebody who learned piano as a kid, and it really made a difference for her as an artist. You have to have some of that foundational musical training to be able to write interesting music, or you're just a savant. You know, these great jazz artists who had no formal training and they just created a whole genre. It's just, but I would say, to answer your question more precisely, it so depends on the mood I'm in.
Right.
So late at night, driving on a highway, I really love listening to jazz. I don't know what it is, but it's night music.
And I love that phrase. I don't know if I heard you say it first or I've heard it a few times, that the mood can determine the music and the music can determine the mood.
So true. Your filters.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. I can be listening to classical while I'm driving, and then I have Pandora on shuffle, and suddenly rap song or Usher song comes on. It's like, hey, I like this too. And it totally shifts me into a different mood or a different place.
Well, you know, this is an interesting point you bring up, is that streaming and streaming services have changed the way we listen.
Sure.
And I kind of regret some of it. And I think some of it's fantastic. The algorithms introduce you to performers you wouldn't know.
True.
Which is great. But the algorithms also can limit you from the journey you have at the record store that we, you know, those of us who are old enough to remember.
I miss that. I miss walking into the record store.
The smell,
the headphones on and sampling the music too.
Yeah. And sitting down and listening to an album and reading the album cover or looking at the art.
It's like reading the back of the cereal box, you know, it's like reading the back of the album cover, the lyrics and the history.
I think it's great vinyl's making a comeback. I really miss that, that slow process, pulling. So my daughter has a record player. I'm glad she's using it.
I love it. I need to get back to that as well. John, there's so many places we can still go. I know we're up against it on time, and we probably didn't even begin to touch where we can go, which means there's a part two coming, which is great. One of the things I would love to do with you when we, not if, but when we do a part two is I would love to plan out a little bit more and maybe play some pieces and have you talk about those pieces. I think I get emotional thinking about doing that because I know all day today I'll be listening to symphony music because I just talked with you this morning. But also I do tend to do that a lot more. But I would love to educate the audience a little bit more on the different pieces.
Sure.
Really promote more what you're doing at the symphony. There's so many things that you're doing that we haven't even touched on yet. And this will be that little teaser for those people. This is episode 109, maybe 110 or 12 or 15 can be a comeback episode where we dive a little bit deeper.
Well, I would first of all say thank you for what you're doing to explore different leaders. I've enjoyed discovering these podcasts. I would say for those people who, haven't been exposed to Pacific Symphony, check out our website, pacificsymphony.org. And the Renee and Henry Segerstrom Center or Concert Hall is the home of Pacific Symphony in the winter, fall, winter, spring, and then Great Park Live in the summer. But we do so much free stuff in the community. We hope people will check us out and learn about this beautiful journey they can take with the symphony.
I was going to ask how people can get involved, but you beat me to it, so that's good. So yeah, and for anybody watching or listening today as well, reach out to me as well. I'll take you. I mean, I want to not only learn more myself, but I want others to as well. So I already feel like I'm a big advocate for the symphony. I talk about you everywhere I go. I don't think a day goes by where I don't have some conversation about you or the symphony, or I have them listen to music, and it's I love it. I think the music, the symphony and classical music is an area where I certainly need more class and culture in my life. And that's a simple way for me to get it. What's the best way if anybody wants to reach you? You talked about the pacificsymphony.org. If anybody wants to reach directly to you, just go through the site, or I know you're on social media. I've seen you on LinkedIn.
They can contact our office at my office is 714-755-5790. That's to my assistant if they have a question. But we have a big team. So if they're interested in getting subscriptions, buying a season ticket, it's one way to experience the journey. They can call our ticket office or check us out online. You can do it pretty much anything online with the pacificsymphony.org. So happy to help, happy to answer questions, take people on the journey.
Cool. All right, I have two final questions and I'll let you go. Second to last question is, what are you most excited about? What's on the horizon other than Alexander Shelley coming in May, which obviously could be your answer. But when you think about the direction of the symphony or big performances coming up, promote whatever you'd like, or just share what you're excited about that's on the horizon.
Well, in the month of January, to start, we have one of the most amazing works in the repertoire, the Alpine Symphony, which is a huge piece for 130 musicians, led by Carl.
Wow.
And it's a work that he cares deeply about. It's amazing. It's sort of like the foundations of film music. Strauss, who wrote the piece, can write a waterfall into the orchestra. He can write cow pastures. It's incredible. There's a wind machine he invented. So that's combined with Vivaldi's Four Seasons, one of the most popular pieces. That's, a couple hundred years earlier in compositional history, but also explores nature. And then on January 25th, we're doing a new concert called Symphonic Soul, celebrating African-American history and a journey through R&B and, gospel and even music from the civil rights era. So it should be a beautiful concert. And then February 1st is our Lunar New Year concert. And it's one of the biggest events we do. We have hundreds of people on stage, dancers, chorus, traditional Chinese instrumentalists. It's an amazing evening. So I think the more you get tuned into what we're about, you'll see there's a lot of diversity. We have a pop series. We have Christmas holiday programming. We just did The Messiah. Pink Martini is coming, great ensemble. So it's a very diverse offering from the symphony, and I'm just excited that we're celebrating Carl's 35th, and he has, a group of remaining concerts. I would say to anybody who wants to explore his legacy, come to these concerts and experience him as we make this transition
Excellent.
to Alexander.
We'll put all your contact information in the notes on the podcast and when we post it and everything. Everybody, it'll be very easy. People have to cover their eyes if to not see how they can get a hold of you or learn more in your concert series and calendar. I know I love the Aretha Franklin tribute that we went to together a few weeks back. That was pretty tremendous. So, all right. So I told you I had 2 questions left, which now leaves me with 1. And this is how I wrap up all of my podcast questions. And with you in particular, with most of my guests, but with you in particular, it seems pretty redundant to ask this question because you just got done answering it for the last hour. But I'm going to finish with, and then we'll close with your words. John Forsyte, what's in your heart?
I'm very grateful for my parents introducing me to classical music. It just, I can't emphasize enough how important parents are to nourishing their children's spirit in whatever way, religion, sport, but don't sacrifice the arts. And I was lucky, and I'm grateful I've had this career, and grateful in particular that it was in Orange County.